My name is Sasha Victor. I'm one of the co-founders of 60 Decibels, and we are very excited to talk about customer level data in financial inclusion and understanding at the customer level how that fits in to the broader spectrum of approaches with respect to impact measurement and impact management. I'm one of the co-founders of 60 Decibels. Very excited to have Safeya, Tara, and Nadina here from Blue Orchard Global Partnerships and Tomeo Solutions, not in that order. That was confusing. Sorry about that. And what I'll do is we'll ask each of our three panelists, I'll be the moderator, to give a short introduction on kind of who they are and where they come from in this conversation. Then I'll be asking each of them a few questions, but please stay very active in the chat. We have Lindsay Smalling from the 60 Decibels team who's going to moderate the chat and bring questions in as soon as possible. We'll try to follow you guys' lead. So again, the focus of this panel is on customer level data. There's definitely been a trend in recent years to have customer level data be more front and center in terms of understanding social impact and social impact measurement and management, both at the level of microfinance and financial inclusion institutions, as well as at the level of investors. So what we're going to try to explore in this panel is what that current practice is, where does it fit in the context of current, more practice overall, impact management practice overall, and also some of the real practicalities of the pushes and pulls. How is this data used? What's valuable about it? What's challenging about it in terms of getting it done? And if we can get to it, mapping the path towards the future. So where is this going from where we've been now to the future? So in that context, I'll ask maybe Safeya, if you could please introduce yourself first, and then we'll go around. We'll give each panelist a minute or so to do their background introduction, and then we'll go from there.
Great. So thanks a lot, Sasha. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to be here at Financial Inclusion Week. So as Sasha said, I'm working for a company called Tomeo Impact Fund Solutions, and I'm heading the impact solutions specifically there. So Tomeo is a Swiss company. We're based in Geneva, and what we do is we offer independent services to various stakeholders across kind of the impact investing industry. We mainly focus on working with impact fund managers, but also investors, development finance institutions, etc. And our products are mainly aiming to support impact investors with a bunch of different things, including like market research about the industry, how they position themselves, but also helping them with their impact measurement and reporting, which is what we're going to talk a bit more about today. And I'll keep it short, and I let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves.
Great. Nadina, maybe over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Also from my end, I'm Nadina Stodik. I'm an impact manager at Blue Orchard Finance. Blue Orchard Finance is an impact asset manager based in Zurich, actually. I'm calling in from Geneva too. Our strategies, we have a number of funds across financial inclusion, which is the largest strategies and offering we have. But then we also have climate finance with climate insurance products, as well as education finance. We are currently talking about data collection, which is a very important topic for my everyday job. And we have run a number of surveys, which I'm very excited to talk about today in terms of positive outcome, but also lesson learned.
Great. And from Switzerland all the way over to Seattle, Tara, if you could introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you, Sasha. My name is Tara Murphy-Ford. I'm the Managing Director of Capital and Impact at Global Partnerships. Global Partnerships is a nonprofit impact-first fund manager dedicated to expanding opportunity for people living in poverty. We've managed 9 funds. 4 of those funds are currently active debt funds with large exposures in financial inclusion. It's where we got our start. We now invest across multiple strategies as well, but have been working over the past 3 years with 60 Decibels to deploy lean data in our portfolio to better understand whether or not we're reaching our target market and whether or not lives are improving. During that time, we've done about 17 assessments with our social enterprise partners. 15 of those have been in financial inclusion. We've spoken with over 5,000 clients across 12 different countries. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about our learnings and what's ahead.
Great, perfect. So maybe we'll start with Safeya, and just to situate us a little bit. And Safeya, you have been with Symbiotics, as you mentioned, and now at Tomeo Solutions. And Tomeo is offering kind of a suite of impact services. And so it would be great to really understand kind of a little bit of the landscape as you see it. And you could describe that as sort of historical practice or current practice or kind of where customer level data, because obviously customer level data is part of a solution. There's not a complete solution. So your perspective, if you could just kind of level set for us on what you see the landscape looking like today, and maybe a little bit of what trends you see emerging.
Yeah, so maybe, yeah, just to preface, I would reiterate what Sasha said, that we see impact management as a process that's integrated all throughout the investment value chain. So starting all the way from choosing new investments, like new potential investments, all the way to monitoring and reporting. And I would say that like the evolution has been that people have focused on earlier stages of the investment value chain as they are less mature, and then slowly as they become more mature, start focusing more on kind of the monitoring and evaluation side of things. So for example, like if you start at the very beginning, you're looking at potential partners, like their policies, their processes, maybe potential risk factors to make sure they're aligned with your impact goals and how likely they are to achieve the expected impact. And then outcomes data, I would say, is collected a certain period of time after an investment is made, maybe like a year later or even longer than that. And you would tend to see that people invest more in outcomes measurement once they have that solid base of impact management processes integrated throughout the investment value chain. So the decision-making process, and then kind of the investment process itself, and then their very standard monitoring of risk and other very basic impact metrics. And once they have all of that settled, then they would start going towards measuring outcomes.
And when you say they, just to kind of follow up on that a little bit, Safia, I mean, there's lots of theys, right? There's your LPs, there's you as an investment management firm, there's the companies themselves. Like, how do you differentiate what each of those theys might be thinking about with respect to impact measurement and management?
Yeah, so I think, I hate saying that on panels, but it's a big kind of it depends kind of answer, because it depends on the setup of the vehicle, right? So it depends whether it's being managed directly by a specialized fund manager, or it's an advisor, whether you have kind of public sector investors behind it, or whether it's more kind of retail investors. So all of those factors influence a lot the process. I would say by and large, the asset owners or the investors are the ones that have the most decision-making power in terms of how the process actually gets implemented. And then they're supported by their fund managers or advisors. So the decision-making power, I think, changes a lot depending on the structure of the investment vehicle.
Great, that helps a lot. And then I'm sure, Nadina, you can pick up on some of that. But maybe we'll turn over to you. I mean, Blue Orchard is a large investor, one of the larger asset managers. And at the same time, you've made a big commitment to collecting client level data. Can you share a little bit about where that motivation came from, and to the extent, how you sort of made that happen within Blue Orchard? And because one of the things we want as a takeaway from this panel is we have a lot of folks who might be interested in heading in this direction, but institutionally it might be a little bit challenging. So not only for you now, but just as all of us kind of go through it and answer our questions, to the extent we can give some of those practical advice of how we got from where we were to where we are today is always really helpful.
Sure, Sasha. So in our case, we have run impact measurement and management in-house for a long time. Since our start, this was a bit one of our strengths. We really developed proprietary tools, and we continuously reported data on clients based on what we collected. But then we naturally came to a point where actually lean data surveys are an independent way to show a different picture of the same thing, which was very interesting for us, because nowadays we talk a lot about independent verification, independent collection of data, and so on. So it was for us an opportunity to test also ourselves, our investees, the end clients, also to learn, to discover new things, probably, because this is a direct way to get input from the borrowers, which is something very special to us. We discovered this approximately 2 years ago with 60 decibels. To date, we run the surveys on 15 investees across, if I'm not mistaken, 12 countries. We did so actually thanks to a big push from our development finance institution. Mainly, it started from there because they are the donors, and actually in particular one, KfW, on behalf of BNZ, which is a German development bank. they are actually the ones that really have a need to show real impact, so to say, behind their investments. And the push came from our technical assistance facilities. We have currently 4 technical assistance facilities we're running, and 3 of those have supported lean data surveys. And it was really a progressive kind of surprise and great news to us when we received the outcome data, because we realized how easily those results are prepared for readers that are also not experts in the field, how understandable they are, how much information you are able to provide thanks to a survey. It's really going beyond a data set that one could collect on a monthly basis or quarterly basis. It provides this human touch that maybe purely output data would not give you. It's a great tool also to showcase impact over time, because in many of these surveys, there is this time aspect that is taken into account. So kind of from the moment one took a loan to today, what is the progress there and how can you quantify it? How can you talk about it? So these are very, very interesting inputs to our investors. And then actually following the DFI push, the retail clients that got access to these results in an anonymous basis appreciated very much. And we actually had very interesting conversation with our investors on it, and we are going to keep having them. We also have actually dedicated a whole section on this topic in our newest impact report that was just released. So it's really showing lots of importance to these studies, and we believe that this is going to keep being a big, so to say, contributor to impact measurement and management. It's really something complementary to what many of us were doing for a long time before, and we believe it's really going to have to stay like this and probably even improve. Maybe technologically, new technologies will allow for new inputs, and it's going to be even more dynamic and interactive and so on. So it's really, that's a bit how it kind of came to what it is today.
It's fascinating. I would love to come back to that retail investor point, but let's keep moving in. So Tara, over to you, and I'll ask a slightly more specific question, but maybe you can start off picking up. I picked up from Nadina a little bit. There was a moment of like we were doing all of these things. We had the sort of Sophia set us up and said, look, you have to have these processes in place. You have to have an approach. You have to have all of this. And Nadina sort of intimated, and at a certain point, we weren't getting any more. They were sort of doing everything that they could, and we wanted to learn more. And I know that GP had a little bit of that experience as well. So it'd be great if you could kind of reference that. And specifically though, where I'd love if you could take us is, I know that GP has been very deliberate and a real leader in terms of thinking about pricing for impact. And so I think it would just be helpful to kind of situate for the audience what that means for GP, and then how customer level data and other data that you gather kind of is an enabler for that. That would be really helpful.
Great. Yeah, I think it really resonates hearing people say, like, there was this point we had put our house in order, we had our impact management practices in place. I'd say there were a couple things happening at the industry level, but then also for global partnerships. 25 years into our work, we've been managing funds since 2005. We were seeing a real differentiation in approaches within the impact investing space, more return-driven impact investing, and what we consider impact first. So design the vehicles with the impact you look to enable, with a real understanding of who you're looking to enable that impact for. So as we were really starting to crystallize our approach and designing our funds and looking to bring our investors and donors, we are a blended capital model, along on that approach of saying, we're really looking to broaden opportunity, deepen inclusion, serve millions, and improve lives subject to capital preservation. There needed to be not only a discipline in our practices, but a real drive for results. To really be able to say that if we're going to start to ask of our investors to do longer term, more patient, lower cost capital, to have more deeply inclusive, impactful opportunities, particularly for people living in poverty in the global South, we need to be able to demonstrate. We need to show that the inclusion profile is really there, and we need to see that lives are improving. And so there was a real fine point on getting to, is it working data? And not just at the level of activity of the fund or activity of the social enterprise, but for the end client. And we were keenly aware that as we thought about capturing data, we really wanted the accountability to lie first and foremost, and is it creating more value for the end constituent? I think there's a lot of kind of top-down asset owner driven or fund manager driven impact measurement practices that our social enterprise partners were saying, but does this help me better manage my business? Does it help me better design products and services for my customers? And so I think that moment in time, we had done some more traditional, data enumeration with field folks doing in-person interviews. It was really timely. It was really it was really costly. It was really time intensive. And by the time we got to data, our social enterprise partners were like, we were thinking about that 2 years ago. So the actionable insights aspect of lean data coming online just looked really promising to us. And so we jumped in kind of saying like, let's see what we can learn. And what we're finding is the more data we capture, the more pattern recognition we're getting. And then turning back and saying, if we're going to price for impact, we need to have a fine point on going beyond practices, beyond outputs to those outcomes, and really starting to value them and asking our investors to do the same. So to put a point on it, Sasha, for us, we're putting a new bar on, if we're going to have our partners qualify for impact first pricing, we want to support them or see them have evidence of who they're serving and what types of outcomes are being enabled.
So just to make sure I'm following and to bring our audience along. So what that means is the cost of capital from global partnerships to your partners is lower. Your cost of capital as global partnerships is also lower. And there are specific impact thresholds that need to be hit by the partners to qualify for that lower cost capital.
Yes, there is an aspect of, there are multiple drivers of pricing, but we do impact screening in advance of our financial due diligence. And when we make a recommendation to our investment team who follows on with the financial due diligence, we're saying not just invest or don't invest, we're saying invest at this amount based on what the evidence is telling us in terms of the inclusion profile and the value proposition of their products and services. And we would recommend pricing be a impact be a consideration in the pricing. So there's still risk and country profile and all of that that's factored in. So you couldn't just do a comparison and say everybody who's high impact has lower pricing at global partnerships. But there is an aspect of bringing in that consideration. And to be quite honest, the social investment team working harder to get the deal done because we're seeing really high impact. And we should be working hard to work with this partner and to do it in a way that's going to help them focus on inclusion and value creation with a lower cost of capital.
Interesting. So Nadia, I'd love to come back to you in a half a second. Just Tara, just one follow-up, which is I would love us to get to the challenges in a second. But one of them obviously is a concern from a microfinance or financial inclusion company that the data could cut both ways, right? If the performance doesn't play out the way they thought. So I just sort of wondering, specifically, since there's such a direct correlation from a pricing perspective, obviously there's upside and there's downside. And I guess I'm just wondering if you have any vignettes that you can share about how that plays out in practice, because I can imagine it could be challenging.
Yeah. I think interestingly, it's been a great directional test of the strength of our impact management practices, because to be honest, Sasha, we've worked really hard to find the partners that are really client-centric, that are really focused on value creation. And so we have yet to have partners who have been deeply disappointed in their lean data results. Right? There may be dimensions of it where they're like, oh, that's an opportunity for improvement. Our poverty outreach wasn't quite where we thought it was going to be. Or there's some indications that clients would like to see, stronger X from our products and services. Clients always want cheaper interest rates, of course. That's not a surprising outcome. But I would say the orientation, Sasha, has not been to penalize those that don't have strong results, but to more incentivize and reward strong performance. So we're not coming in and saying like, ooh, gotcha, right? We're coming in and saying, we want to learn alongside you and identify areas for improvement. And we fully anticipate, because we've been working with you for some time and underwriting your practices, that we're going to see strong results. We're going to see strong outcomes. And if we don't, at least there's the evidence for continuous improvement, which we reward higher. So at this point, we're saying like, we need to see evidence to start to have the conversation about pricing or impact being factored into your pricing. We're not yet evaluating them on the strength of that evidence. So that's not necessarily the consideration there. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's important to us that it isn't a got you exercise. It's a, we believe in you. We wouldn't have invested in you if we didn't. We think this is going to provide an opportunity for learning and an opportunity to demonstrate the impact that you're enabling through your work.
Yeah. And I just want to underline that last point before going to Nadina, which is the mindset of a learning mindset rather than a yes or no, or the risk of penalizing, I think is a prerequisite to doing this kind of work. And so we'll get to this question from the audience in a second. But Nadine, I guess I'm wondering if you could also kind of reflect on maybe in particular kind of the different roles that different stakeholders and their voices play and how you have used the data. You mentioned this a little bit, so maybe you can just pick up on whatever makes the most sense you think would be useful.
Indeed. I actually wanted to take the point that Tara made last on the investees' reactions, because actually in our experience it was exactly the same. In the first place, they were maybe a bit skeptical and scared of the results, but then when we took the final calls with the 60 decibels team, they were all excited about it, and they were actually even happy to have a document that was reliable to tell them where to improve. And they, in all cases, the results were shared with the investment officer, their own loan officers, internally, to really kind of organize follow-ups on actionable kind of to-dos that came out from the studies, which I think 60 decibels prepare very well in the result deck. The results deck are really actually orientated more for the investment companies to really understand their clients better. So the way that this deck is structured is really helpful, I think, to get a good picture of their work, and they highly appreciated that. And at the same time, it was, again, as I was saying before, a great different point of view on things that maybe we have provided previously, but not in such great details to our investors. So it's really, when one looks at the full spectrum, it was a win-win on both sides. And actually, nobody really complained on the cost of such a lean data survey, because it really provides, as I was saying before, complementary information to what was collected previously. So it's something new that then one can really use. It can use, as Safia was hinting before, to prove the strategy of a product. So to say, if you have an impact strategy or an impact objective set for your fund, you can use such studies to prove that you're actually achieving this objective. Although, of course, we know that you're not covering the full population of your clients, but one of the aspects that was really actually discussed in our meetings with the technical assistant committees was this statistical representation, and we actually really learned a lot about the methodology used in 60 decibel, and we really can actually assure that the clients that are called on and they're kind of interviewed are really representative of the full population of the microfinance institutions that we talk to. So it's really, in that sense, statistically relevant. So it's really, I really struggle actually to find a drawback to this effort, because I think from an impact perspective, and this is my daily bread and butter, it's really something really interesting to have, and it complements an impact and ESG framework of any impact asset manager. Whatever tools we have in place, direct connection to end borrowers is something that I think resource-wise and time-wise we don't really manage to have ourselves as impact asset manager. There is a lot of time involved. Languages, it's something also that might be a big challenge that 60 decibels has actually solved with local researchers that speak local languages, which is really important, so that there is no misunderstanding of the question. And this is something that I, as an impact manager, even though I would love to do, I cannot do. So it's that's also, again, showing a bit how this brings new added value to our work. So I really think all stakeholders involved are, in our case, have been very pleased, and I include ourselves in it, our management. And this is also why we decided to feature it in our own publication and to continue doing it. We just have opened up, as you know, Sasha, for sure, new 7 investees for our COVID fund. So lots going on, and I'm sure it's going to keep being there. There is no one that is actually that is questioning anymore whether it makes sense or not. We are past that discussion now.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I'll go back to Safia, because I'd love if you have any reactions, and then a follow-up question for you. But I think it's in some ways it's a question of what the default behavior is. And as you mentioned, Adina, this question of switching from a default behavior of not speaking and not listening to clients in a systematic way to doing so, it does feel like once an organization gets to that other point, it just becomes very, very natural. So Safia, if you had any reactions to either Tara or Adina's comments or otherwise, there are some questions from the audience. Tange asks some examples of impact indicators that panelists follow. So maybe you can help us by answering that question. And then, but if you had any other reactions, if you want to change that.
No, I just wanted to highlight one point that was kind of touched upon by both Tara and Nadina, which is the way that the data is shared with the investees and the way that it's shared with investors. So this whole concept of like, what do you do with the data? Like, what is the point of sharing this feedback? And I think that's really important because a lot of people, like, I think we've already moved the conversation away from let's just measure impact for the sake of sharing the impact, but actually measuring it for the sake of actually using the data to help the investees and to also help inform the investors. And I think that that's a really important turning point in the financial inclusion industry, because historically we've kind of focused a lot on looking at kind of output metrics about where the capital is flowing. And while that is still and will always be relevant, I think it's now really, really important to think about how we can be more selective with our investment processes, like choosing investees that we know are aligned with our values. And also, as Tara was saying, supporting those that we work with to improve their processes and, improve their outreach and their impact moving forward. So in the work that we've done in the past, and I've shared this with the panelists before, but also to share with the audience, it's really important to disseminate the results both to the end, so to the MFIs, so that they really understand how their clients are performing and what areas they might be lagging behind on that they need to work on, but also to share it with the investors, both at an investee level and on an aggregate level, so that they understand more broadly how their money is being used and whether there's anything they need to change about the investment process or about their kind of direction of travel more broadly. Like, are they moving in the right direction or not? That kind of last point we've seen being implemented a little bit less, but I hope we'll pick up more in the future to use the feedback to investors to feed back into defining strategy and processes, in business plans for the coming years. So I hope that will be kind of the next natural step moving forward.
Great, sounds good. And just to make sure we answer the question, impact indicators. I mean, if anybody wants to take those, so just.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all of us can take that. I mean, we've looked at a bunch of different things historically. So we've looked at poverty outreach, we've looked at quality of life, we've looked at repayment capacity. Over indebtedness is something that's really important in the microfinance industry. Impacts on business performance, on ability to deal with shocks and kind of smooth consumptions in households. Those are some of the things off the top of my head, but I'll let you guys add to that.
Go ahead.
Go
Nadina.
ahead. Yeah, I do. Okay. So as Sophia said, these were the indicators we looked at in the lean data surveys with 60 decibel as well. And then on top, as I was saying, the ones that we at Blue Orchard look at are really descriptive of clients. So what type of people we are reaching out, in terms of gender, of course, location and so on, but also the usage of the loan, which is an important information, business loans versus other non-business purposes. The sectors they go in, these are data we have at all times at hand. And then similar to Safia, I think this is really the standard kind of content of these lean data surveys. We have collected similar indicators. And then maybe if I can add on, one of the great features also is that we could tailor make part of the survey to the purpose of the study we wanted to do. So we have a number of surveys that are more COVID related or impacts of COVID, others that are more employment related because this was the purpose of the survey. So for that, we would collect more data that are relevant for that specific purpose. So this was also something very useful.
Great. Tara, did you have something to add there?
Thinking about what would be additive, and I know Sasha, the 60 decibels team has been thinking about this a lot. I mean, global partnerships holds belief that not all financial inclusion is looking to reach the same clients and deliver the same solutions. So one of the things that we're thinking about is what are the impact metrics that we can capture across different geographies, different target markets, different products and services, and which ones are specific. So we've done the majority of our surveying in our Women-Centered Finance with Education and our Rural-Centered Finance with Education initiatives, as contrasted with home improvement finance or micro-entrepreneurship growth finance, or productive asset finance. And so within the Women-Centered Finance with Education, for example, I think being really clear on your strategies outcomes. So who is it that you're looking to serve and what types of outcomes are you looking to enable? What I've witnessed is that it's an aligning practice for us with our partners and with our investors to say this is who we're looking to serve and these are the outcomes we're looking to enable. Very much the things that Safia and Nadina mentioned, not just capacity to save and capacity to generate an income, but how is your role in household decision making changed as a proxy for empowerment, that income and consumption smoothing, but also I think our investment thesis is around how is the well-being of the household improving as a result of engagement with our partners. So people may choose or clients may choose to reinvest in the nutrition, school, health, well-being of their households. And so we've been measuring some of those things as well, because not all of the benefit drives back into the business. It also drives into the household. But I would say the practice of actually sitting down and saying, what would we measure together? What do we care about? Very quickly you realize, is there alignment in our investment theses and practices? And that in and of itself has been really powerful for us in terms of strengthening our partnerships, both with our downstream partners and with our upstream asset owners.
That's great. I was just writing that down. Really appreciate it. So there's another question from Tanguy, which will be, I think, for you, Tara, but I'll try to take the one from Tanya above, and then maybe you guys can just jump in since it's a little bit of a technical answer. So the question is whether or not, how does the cost and kind of cost benefit of doing voice-based surveys compare to doing SMS or IVR surveys? And so the sort of technical point there is typically what we are doing is a representative sample of usually 200 to 250 responses. So although the cost per response of doing a phone call is obviously significantly higher than a text message, the total number of responses one needs is not that high. So if your cost per response, it depends drastically by the geography, but let's say your cost per response in most of the developing world is a few dollars. You can imagine the total cost for that, the total incremental cost is actually not that high. Our experience, and we have deployed and we continue to deploy all the technologies, is one is that SMS in particular excludes illiterate populations and has a lot of limitations in terms of what you can get. And so for us, we have just found there's sort of a sweet spot of the mix of qualitative and quantitative data, plus customer engagement and customer experience that we're able to do via voice-based surveys that we've just not been able to replicate through IVR or SMS. So that's just kind of how we've landed up there. We actually started thinking, I personally thought we were going to do mostly SMS, but I'm just curious for the rest of the panelists if there are other thoughts on that particular point, and then maybe we can move on to the question around pricing for Tara.
Yeah, I mean, I would really echo exactly what you said, Sasha. Actually, we never worked with SMS surveys in the past. We worked on in-person surveys. So it was rather the opposite extreme. So it was kind of assessing the additional benefit of doing in-person surveys versus phone surveys. And in-person surveys we found were in fact like extremely costly, especially in this space of working in financial inclusion, because we ran these surveys years ago. And we found that if you're trying to really reach people in all the different kind of villages where the branches of microfinance institutions operate, the cost really adds up very, very fast. And while there is, I have to say, some benefit in doing that, because you do have the survey enumerators being able to physically see what people are talking about in terms of their businesses, and also have the opportunity to talk to them for longer. So to give them really a chance to voice any concerns they might have. People, I think, tend to get a little bit iffy after like 15, 20 minutes on the phone. They'll want to hang up. So I do see that there is a benefit to doing in-person surveys when the cost allows, when you really want a deep dive on something very specific. But for really scale, I would say phone surveys are definitely more effective, so that you're not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars just on the data collection.
Great. So we have more questions rolling in, so maybe we'll do one response per question. Tara, do you want to take a crack? So the question from Tanguy is specifically like on the details of pricing. And I guess the question reads, are there schemes where a lender would say, I'll lend you at 17%, but I'll lend you at 16% if you stick to such impact reporting standard, and then have the difference in cost pay for the study, and how far down can you go? It sounds like he's basically, the real question is, how far do you push on pricing, and how kind of correlated is the impact performance and pricing?
Yeah. Maybe I'll take that question, and I'm not trying to dodge it, but I think maybe more highlight, like, how do we want to be in dialogue? Because as a fund manager, we're an intermediary and we're trying to align and design to drive the most value as possible for the end client. right? But we do that through conversations with our social enterprise partners and conversations with our investors, right? And we try to build partnerships for the long term. So each time we're renewing a loan or thinking about increasing a loan, we're having a conversation about what is the impact that you're looking to enable with growth capital, because that's what we're providing. You may have a different conversation with your equity investors. You may have a different conversation with your subordinated debt, but as a growth stage funder, we're saying, what are you looking to do in your growth? Not just growth for growth's sake, check the box, this is how many clients they're going to be able to serve, but saying, who are you looking to serve in your growth? What type of outcomes are you looking to enable in their lives? And that's the type of capital we want to be providing you with, right? Because there's a lot of growth in microfinance that doesn't drive to people who are underserved, right? And there's a lot of growth in microfinance that is too pinched on the margin to really focus on some of the value-added wraparound education, training, and support services, where the evidence tells us there's a lot of lift in the outcomes that are being enabled. So when we sit down with our partners, we're saying, okay, here's the strengths and weaknesses that we're seeing right now in your impact management practices and your outcomes. What is your growth plan? How are you going to be addressing those? And we're seeing the positive improvements that are happening. We want to bring down your cost of funding over time. Let's see, okay, we're going to start here. And if we see that growth, if we see you actually continuing to maintain your poverty outreach at X percentage of your clients during that growth, when we're up for renewal, let's have a conversation about bringing down that cost of capital. Let's have a conversation about doing more. And for our asset owners, those conversations around, we're really not just directing our capital to microfinance institutions, we're directing our capital towards microfinance institutions that are truly looking to serve those that are underserved. Really, there's a differentiation in that. And part of the conversation with our social enterprise partners is, when you can show that you're different than a vanilla microfinance institution that's focused on purely growth for growth's sake and profitability, you should be able to attract lower cost funding. Right? So share this report with as many investors as you can. Show the ways that you're different, because that should, if we're impact investors, we should be valuing that. It's not just the risk adjusted rate of return, it's the risk and impact adjusted rate of return, because the value that's coming back is not just the return. It's the impact that's being enabled through the social enterprise. So I don't know if that's helpful in the response specifically. I mean, conversations about pricing also have credit risk, and they have country risk rating, and they have a whole host of other pieces, but that's how we want to be engaging with our partners.
That's great. That's super helpful. And I just want to really underline the risk and impact adjusted rate of return, which is really what we're all here to do. We'll come back to the questions for the audience, just super practically. A two-part question for everyone, and maybe short answers, just because we still have a lot of questions left, which is, how do you pay for it? These sort of work, like literally, where does this money come from? And how do you think we should pay for this? Meaning, if there's a gap between how you're currently paying today and how you think as an industry we would be paying for this sort of work in the future, that would be great to hear. So maybe Nadina, how do you guys currently pay for customer level data?
So at the moment, all our lean data surveys have been financed through technical assistance facilities. So these are donors, these are investors in our products, in our funds, that donate money to capacity building. And this capacity building, the purposes around projects that we select there are defined by the donors. So the fact that we run so many surveys, it means that donors are really valuing now this type of studies. Before, we would use the money to do, improvements of social performance practices of investees, or it could be other topics also that related to impact. Now it's really focusing more on this impact. And to be honest, in the future, I mean, before there has been a mention from Sofia that it could be, or it can be taken directly from the fund expenses. I personally say, why not? I mean, if somebody is ready to invest in, fund money for other purposes, then it should be also feasible and possible to do that for impact. If really investor believe that this is one of the strategic objectives of the fund, and the reason why also they invest money in that product versus other products. So I believe this is the two ways that currently we could have to finance. Of course, there is an issue once there is no technical assistance facilities. We have that across our portfolio of products that don't have that, but then we sometimes share as investees, so the results could be used across different products, but it's not ideal, of course.
Interesting. Sofia, what's your thought?
Yeah, in my experience, we've had both models. So we've worked on projects where the data collection was financed by donor money from a technical assistance facility. And then we've had another project that we worked on for 4 years where the data collection was financed directly by the fund. The fund in that case was a public-private partnership. So the kind of the data collection was co-financed both by the public sector who was participating and the private investors, and they committed to that upfront. So in the documentation, in the launch and setup of the fund, they said we will commit X amount to impact measurement on an annual basis, and this was a fixed amount for the entire kind of lifetime of the fund. And for me, I think both models work at the end of the day. But like Nadina was saying, there are many, many fund managers out there who do not have access to donor money, who do not have donors that they work with. They don't have a technical assistance facility. So it would be really ideal if we reach a point in time where it becomes common practice to include in fund budgets directly from the beginning in the setup a certain allocation for impact measurement. Of course, it's going to depend on the size of the fund, how much they can allocate. But I mean, that's maybe a super detailed conversation to have. But for me, I think especially for impact investors that are managing a sizable portfolio, it makes a lot of sense to earmark a certain amount of their budget, of their regular operating expenses for impact measurement. Because then it kind of just is built into the fund management fees, and it makes a lot of sense because they get this regular feedback loop on the impact performance of their portfolios. Some people who are working on the investment side, I think if they heard me say this, would not be very happy. But I mean, I think that's just maybe my 2 cents on it.
Great. Tara, what about you? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've been at Global Partnerships for 13 years, and I've been on a bullhorn the whole time of no one's pricing impact into the margin. And I'm glad to think that won't be something I can say forever. We have funded our studies through philanthropic support, but our most recent fund that we launched in August does have this as a allowable expense in the fund expenses. So moving in the direction of not being able to do it for every single partner every single year, but to be able to gain a critical mass for directional insight in the fund. I would maybe just prompt for the audience and the panel. I think the next piece is how do we syndicate, because there is shared value that's being created through these assessments. I know for Global Partnerships, we work really hard to raise the philanthropy to pay for these assessments, and we know and we want other investors, for example, to be benefiting from the results. Right. But I see, we have one earlier stage fund, and we have done more because there's kind of rounds and investors are talking a lot to say okay, we all care about this. Let's all co-fund and have the social enterprise have some skin in the game as well to say if we all really value this, let's pay for it together. And then we have more resources to pool to put towards the work. So would just love to see more coordination across investors so that we can get as much lift as possible, as much visibility and as much transparency out of the work.
Yeah, and you could really, if you could pull that off, and Tara, as you know, we've been trying to figure out how to do this ourselves. If you could pull that off, your cost per investee per year would be, a few $1,000s per investor. I mean, it really gets to be quite small.
Yeah, and I would say just, in terms of the value proposition across stakeholders, the more data we have, the more value this work has, because we start to get pattern recognition. We have more benchmarking capability. We have more trend data. So the fact that we could get more coverage up until now, Sasha, what we've said is we can't afford to do this with everyone, but it's giving us directional insight for us to test into whether or not our investment thesis can deliver desired outcomes, right? But if we had more resources to be able to put toward this, and I love the point that how much do we spend on financial auditing and management, right? And if we compared that to the impact auditing and management and work, what would that look like? And we call ourselves impact investors in particular. So let's really hold up a mirror and ask that question. But yeah, I think I just look at it. I'm gosh, if we had lean data for every partner in our portfolio in a given year, gosh, the learnings would just skyrocket. Whereas now we're looking at a timestamp over 3 years, and some partners did surveying pre-COVID and some partners did surveying post-COVID. And so we're kind of look at changes in time.
Yeah, that's syndication point. And again, if we have an audience member who's figured out how to do syndication, please let us know. So there's a question now from Georgina about how do we benchmark, compare, or evaluate effectiveness of an investee when making investment decisions and over time. I know the GIN recently put out a report called Compass, including recommendations for effectiveness and KPR benchmarking to use their framework or another. I'll kick that off and then turn it over to folks. One of the things that we have seen, as you heard from all the panelists' answers to the question about what the metrics are, is that there's a good degree of commonality in terms of what everybody's asking for, and then as like Dina was indicating, and then you'll have some specificity on top of that. So there's a core, and then there's the, we specifically care about this topic in this fund for this reason. And so one of the things that we are in the process of doing, and many of the panelists are involved in, is a standardized 60 decibels financial inclusion index, which takes that core set of about 25 to 30 indicators and makes that standard across, it's currently about 50 participants. We expect to have more than 100 participating microfinance institutions. And it's for everything that Tara just said. It's to really make that comparability core and built in. And the data points that we put into that have really fallen out of all the work we've done with Blue Orchard, with Tomeo and Symbiotics, with global partnerships and others, where we just saw this level of commonality and we said, we think that the value is inherently higher the more comparability there is. So that's an initiative that will go through the middle of next year, for which people are still signing up for, but our hope is that we get as much transparency and comparability as possible. So if I just thought that would be the shortest answer to that, but curious, I don't know, maybe it's for you, Safia, or others, where this fits in with what the GIN has put out in Compass and other KPIs, et cetera. Because I know one of the things that's a challenge for people who are trying to do this sort of work is that there's lots of metrics and lots of standards and sort of where do I start and what do I pick and how does it all need to align. So I don't know, Safia, if you want to take a crack at that specific question around the GIN metrics or anything else.
I don't have a lot to add on that. What I would say is it's already really challenging to benchmark anything in the impact investing industry. And we work a lot on that, more on the kind of state of the market, characteristics of impact funds, their performance, et cetera, through our annual private asset impact fund survey, where we're benchmarking kind of the universe of impact investing funds. But as you'll see in that report, and as you'll see actually in the GIN report, a lot of the metrics on impact are quite limited. So you'll see a lot about the outreach of funds. So looking at the number of clients that you're able to reach for a given size of a fund, looking at characteristics of end borrowers, as Nadina was saying earlier, in terms of gender, in terms of location. A lot of people now are also reporting on what kind of themes or goals or SDGs they're trying to address, but you'll see a lot less data that you can benchmark on really end client performance, which is why what you guys are doing is really, really interesting with the index and with the work that you've already done historically. So the benchmarks are already there, and I'm sure that moving forward they'll grow a lot more. Yeah.
Great. So we're technically supposed to stop at the top of the hour. We've been given a reprieve since we started late, but also I suspect that a lot of our attendees might have had another thing that starts soon. So I think we'll start to begin to wrap up with a little flexibility. So if there are additional questions from the chat, we'll try to respond to those. But Dina, maybe I can start with you and then go around. Just sort of, either any reflection from what we've talked about so far, things we've left out, or more kind of where are we going? Where do you see the direction of travel? And is there any gap between where you think we're going and where you'd like to see us go as a sector as a whole? Would be a great place to start.
Sure, Sasha. So I would rather keep it short and say quality over quantity. I think it's very important that in impact we focus on what is material, what is really giving us the relevant information to make the right decision from an impact perspective, but then also including all the other elements. Impact should be treated as risk, as any other factor we analyze before making an investment decision. So this is the case for all of us that are active in this industry, but it should become the case for everyone else as well. And I think the industry overall now also going beyond impact investing is going in that direction, also thanks to regulatory push we are receiving and other kind of external kind of players and stakeholders that are now really trying to provide more guidance and really help everybody to kind of step on this journey and understand the value of it. So I think it's really important that this focus, not anymore trying to, develop something in our own way to make ourselves kind of more brilliant than others, but really try to take stock of what others have already tested for many years, best practices, apply those, concentrate to what is relevant, what is material for the strategies we are looking at, and then really report on it and be transparent as much as we can. This is, I think, really the holy grail, I think, of the impact investing and the impact investor in the future, but then also an investor lambda in general. I think it should really be how people should think, and I would really hope that this is where we're going.
That's great. Savea, either hopes or predictions for the future?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I really, really hope to see moving forward, and I think we're already headed in that direction, is to see more standardization in impact measurement, the same way that we see standardization in looking at financial performance. So really knowing what kind of indicators to track in the financial inclusion industry on a consistent basis, and then taking the lessons learned from that to inform our broader impact hypothesis for the industry. So we've seen over time that this has evolved so much because data that was being gathered. And I think that's exactly what we need to keep doing, because the industry will continue to evolve. So if you asked somebody 20, 30 years ago why they were investing in microfinance, they were going to tell you that they thought that they were lifting people out of poverty. This was back in 2005. And now we have a much more nuanced way of looking at it. We know that it's focusing more on helping people to build resilience, to be able to capture opportunities, to improve their overall household spending and consumption. And the way we were able to get to that point of learning what we're doing with our money is through data collection. So I think we need to keep doing that so we can be better informed, and also to be able to customize the products for those needs to maximize the positive impact.
There's a lot in there. I would love to go back to, but we're out of time. Tara, your thoughts about the future.
Yeah, Sophia and Nadina, you've been very clear about where we are. And I think I would just add that if I rolled the tape all the way forward, more people would be benefiting from financial inclusion and lives would be improving. And that has to do with capturing the data in the first instance, but what we do with that data and to what end matters, right? Capturing the data is step one, right? But I think we need to get out of the silo of impact for reporting and accountability purposes to how is impact data driving better decision making? And that means that we also need impact investing professionals that believe in impact data, see impact as integrated from a performance perspective, and want to drive decision making with that data, right? What would it look like to have more leaders of financial institutions, fund managers, family offices saying like, no, I won't make a decision until I have better data, right? So I think, I would just encourage all of us that the data absolutely needs to be there. And then we also have to have the mechanisms in place to look at that data, interpret that data, and truly have it at the table at decision making. Because my hope is that as we continue to do this and we hear from end clients, that they're reporting stronger and stronger outcomes in their lives. Because if that's not happening, then we can capture all the data we want, but it's not driving toward what it is we're all here trying to enable in the first place. So yeah, let's get working not just on the data, but also on the capacity to interpret it and integrate it.
Great. Well, that's a great place for us to end, and I'll just try to do my best to summarize. But obviously, there's a lot of richness here that we would love to go deeper into. But to Tara's point, ultimately, the data is a means to an end. It is enabling us to understand how we are achieving the goals that we've set out for ourselves in the first place. And then embedded in a lot of what we've talked about. Obviously, we're talking about a set of techniques that potentially make it easier to get data that is more useful, that is more comparable and comparative. But we've talked about a mindset that has to do with learning. We've talked about a mindset that has to do with integration. And fundamentally, we've talked about a mindset that says our purpose here is around creating a set of positive outcomes in the world. And these data are a step in our tool chest, a step in our tool chest, a tool in our tool chest, a step along the path to help us do that better. And so the data has to be live and active and used by all stakeholders, by the companies themselves, by investors, by the investors in those investors, and become part of the conversation, not the whole conversation, but integral to the conversation, like a lot of other things that we have learned how to integrate. And I guess I'd share that as a last reflection. Investors in particular are very skilled at acquiring a lot of information, integrating that information, and using that information, but it does take time. And this is kind of a new type of data that we are now beginning to gather. And I would propose that it will take some of the time for that integration to happen, for that sophistication to happen, and that learning mindset to translate into real actions. And so there's one last question that is too complex to answer, so we will answer it offline. So I'll let it go. So thank you all very much for attending our panel, for putting up a little bit of our technical difficulties. Thank you so much for the panelists. Obviously, very rich experiences here. We'd all love to hear from panelists if there are follow-up questions for us. And with that, we'll finish up. So have a great rest of the day wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.